Hello friends, and welcome to Medieval Screen Finds. Tonight, we will plunge into the treacherous waters of medieval coastlines, far from the romanticized image of grand pirate captains and buried treasure. This is not a tale of heroic quests or daring escapes, but rather a deeper current, a quieter story that flows beneath the surface of well-known histories. Our voyage will uncover the harsh reality of sea wolves and scavengers, the lesser-known pirates, opportunistic raiders, and coastal brigands who preyed on vulnerable communities and shipping. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, and let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always intriguing to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights. Perhaps light an incense or two for that soothing fragrance. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. We will explore the diverse origins of these maritime criminals, their brutal methods of attack and survival, and the profound, often devastating, impact they had on medieval trade, coastal life, and the very perception of the sea. We acknowledge the grim realities that lie within these historical currents. Yet our focus will remain on the quiet unfolding of events, the subtle yet profound consequences, rather than the sharp edges of violence. We seek to understand the textures of their lives, the echoes of their choices, and the long shadow they cast upon the medieval world. Picture this: the harsh realities of medieval coastal life, a delicate balance poised precariously between sustenance and scarcity. The rhythm of existence for many communities was inextricably linked to the unpredictable bounty of the sea and the often fickle generosity of the land. For those dwelling on the rugged shores, life was a constant struggle, a quiet battle against the elements and the ever-present threat of hunger. A poor harvest, a blight upon the limited agricultural plots, or a sudden, unexplained depletion of fish stocks could swiftly transform a precarious existence into one of profound desperation. Families, whose lives had been woven into the fabric of the coast for generations, found themselves facing the stark choice between slow starvation and an unthinkable leap into the unknown. Consider the fisherman, his hands calloused from years of hauling nets, his face weathered by the relentless spray of the ocean. One season, the nets come up empty, day after day, week after week. The once plentiful herring or cod have vanished, driven perhaps by shifting currents or unseen predators, leaving behind only the cold, empty expanse of the water. His small boat, once a source of pride and provision, now serves only as a stark reminder of his failing livelihood. Or perhaps, the family that has tilled the same rocky soil for centuries finds their land suddenly claimed by a powerful lord, their ancient rights swept away by a decree they cannot comprehend or challenge. These were the origins of a growing pool of rootless people, adrift in a world that offered them little solace or legitimate opportunity. They possessed skills, the knowledge of tides and currents, the handling of ropes and sails, the resilience born of hardship, but no sanctioned outlet for their abilities. Their gaze, once fixed on the horizon for the return of a catch, now began to wander, seeking other forms of sustenance, other avenues for survival. Adding to this quiet desperation were the pervasive feudal obligations and the relentless grip of exploitation. The local lord, ostensibly the protector of his people, often viewed the coastal communities as little more than a source of revenue. Taxes were levied on every fish brought to market, every bolt of cloth traded, every transaction that hinted at prosperity. These burdens, heavy and unyielding, could strangle the fragile economies of small villages, pushing families to the very brink. For some, the path of illicit activity, a silent rebellion against an unjust system, began to appear not as a moral failing, but as a desperate necessity. They saw the goods flowing through the waterways, the wealth accumulating in the hands of the privileged, and felt a profound, burning sense of injustice. The sea, once their provider, began to transform in their minds into a different kind of hunting ground. Indeed, the sea itself presented a paradox, a source of both life and lawlessness. Much like the dense, ancient forest that offered sanctuary to outlaws and rebels, the vast, untamed expanse of the ocean was an ungoverned space where the law was difficult to enforce. The rhythmic pulse of the waves, the endless horizon, concealed a world beyond the reach of terrestrial authority. Medieval governance, with its nascent legal systems and limited reach, struggled to impose order on the fluid, ever-shifting boundaries of the maritime world. This untamed wilderness became a refuge, a canvas upon which new, darker lies could be painted. And within this vastness, nature offered its own intricate tapestry of concealment. Envision the intricate lacework of coastlines, riddled with countless coves, hidden inlets, and rocky islands. These were not merely picturesque landscapes. They were natural fortresses, providing ideal hiding places for small vessels, secure havens for stolen goods, and silent escape routes when pursuit grew too close. The dense fog that could roll in from the sea, blanketing the land in a shroud of mystery, offered another layer of protection, allowing a pirate vessel to vanish as swiftly as it appeared. The challenge for medieval authorities, local lords, nascent navies, in tracking and apprehending these elusive figures in the open sea or intricate coastlines was immense. A single, swift ship, manned by those who knew every secret current and hidden passage, could simply melt away into the vastness, leaving frustrated pursuers staring at an empty horizon. Compounding this elusive quality was the often fuzzy distinction between legitimate privateering and outright piracy, especially in times of war or political instability. The lines blurred. A local lord, perhaps seeking to destabilize a rival, might issue a letter of marque, a document ostensibly granting permission to attack the shipping of an enemy. Yet, these letters were often loosely interpreted, or even fabricated, by individuals and groups eager to legitimize their plundering. The concept of state-sanctioned raiding could easily devolve into indiscriminate acts of robbery and violence against any vulnerable vessel, regardless of its nationality or allegiance. Some coastal lords, far from upholding the law, actively supported or tacitly allowed piracy, sometimes even participating, for a share of the spoils or to destabilize rivals. Imagine a powerful noble, whose coffers were dwindling, turning a blind eye to the sudden influx of illicit goods into his port, perhaps even receiving a cut of the profits in exchange for safe harbor or a convenient disappearance of any troublesome witnesses. This complicity, a quiet corrosion of justice, further fueled the rise of the sea wolves. Among those who found themselves drawn to this precarious existence were former sailors and disbanded crews. The scars of war at sea were often deep, leaving a wake of unemployment and disillusionment. After naval conflicts concluded, or during periods of economic downturn, countless sailors and fishermen found themselves cast adrift, possessing invaluable maritime skills but lacking legitimate employment. They were the seasoned veterans of the waves, men who understood the language of the wind and the temperament of the tides, but for whom the traditional avenues of livelihood had closed. They became, in a sense, the mercenaries of the waves, their expertise now redirected towards the acquisition of wealth through any means necessary. A decommissioned merchant vessel, its crew unpaid and its future uncertain, could easily transform into a pirate ship, its experienced hands now turning their formidable skills to the pursuit of plunder rather than peaceful trade. And so, the promise of plunder became a powerful, almost irresistible lure. The immediate gratification of wealth acquired through robbery offered a swift antidote to the gnawing pains of poverty and desperation. They saw the constant flow of goods along coastlines and through key waterways: the wine from Gascony, the grain from England, the rich textiles from Flanders, the gleaming silver from distant mines, as a lucrative target. It was not merely about acquiring luxury. Often, it was about resource acquisition itself, the desperate need for food, for essential supplies, and even for new ships to replace aging or damaged ones. A successful raid meant not just silver in the pocket, but warm clothes for the winter, a full belly, and the fleeting taste of power in a world that had offered them none. Finally, the landscape of local conflicts and ingrained feuds provided fertile ground for the seeds of piracy to take root. Coastal communities, often isolated and fiercely independent, were prone to inter-community hostilities. Border disputes, fishing rights, and ancient grievances could easily escalate into raids that blurred the lines with outright piracy. The taking of a rival village's fishing boats, the burning of their nets, or the seizure of their stores could be framed as an act of local retribution. But the outcome was indistinguishable from a pirate attack. And sometimes, piracy was simply a tool for vengeance and retaliation, a swift, brutal response against rivals or oppressive authorities who had inflicted real or perceived wrongs. A lord who had unjustly seized land, a merchant who had cheated a local fisherman, a tax collector who had demanded too much, all could find themselves the target of a swift, unforgiving act of maritime brigandage, a testament to the raw, untamed justice of the sea wolves. The motivations were complex, a tapestry woven from desperation, opportunity, and the harsh, unyielding realities of medieval life. This complex interplay of economic hardship, the untamed nature of the sea, the ambiguities of medieval law, and the stark choices individuals faced, all contributed to the genesis of these lesser-known pirates. They were not always the flamboyant figures of later legend, but rather a more pragmatic, often desperate, breed of outlaw. Their motivations, though rooted in criminality, sprang from a deeper well of societal conditions that often offered little alternative for those on the margins. The sea, for them, was not merely a pathway for trade, but a boundless hunting ground, a place where the rules of the land held little sway. It was a realm of profound opportunity for those willing to embrace its inherent lawlessness, and a terrifying threat for those who relied on its pathways for their very survival. The slow, relentless pressure of daily existence, coupled with the allure of quick, if dangerous, gain, forged these sea wolves, shaping them into a constant, low-level menace that would plague the medieval coast for centuries to come. Their story is a reminder that even in the most romanticized periods of history, there existed a harsh, unseen struggle, a constant rhythm of violence and survival that pulsed just beneath the surface of everyday life. This understanding of their origins is crucial to comprehending the profound impact they would have on the lives of ordinary people and the very fabric of medieval society. The tides of desperation, indeed, often led to the most unexpected and unsettling destinations. As the sun cast its long, uncertain shadows across the medieval coasts, the sea wolves, born from the currents of desperation and opportunity, honed their deadly craft. Their existence was a constant performance of vigilance and brutal efficiency, their methods a stark contrast to the romanticized notions of daring duels and buried chests. These lesser-known pirates were opportunistic, their attacks sudden and devastating, leaving a trail of shattered lives and economic ruin. They operated not with grand strategy, but with an intimate understanding of the sea's unpredictable moods and the vulnerable arteries of medieval trade. Their primary hunting ground was the open water, where unsuspecting merchant vessels, laden with the vital commodities of the age, became easy prey. These were not always the sprawling fleets of later centuries, but often single ships, making their solitary way along familiar routes, their crews focused on the rhythm of the waves and the distant horizon. Pirate ambushes were strategically set, lurking in narrow straits where ships were forced to slow, in the swirling currents of river mouths, or within the bustling confines of busy shipping lanes near vulnerable ports. Imagine a merchant cog, its sails full of wind, its holds heavy with wine from Gascony or grain destined for a hungry city, moving through a constricted channel. The crew, perhaps lulled by the steady drone of the rigging, would suddenly find themselves overwhelmed. The pirates favored small, fast ships, often galleys or cog-like vessels modified for speed and maneuverability. These nimble craft could emerge swiftly from hidden coves or slip silently across the water, closing the distance to their target before an alarm could be raised. The attack itself was a whirlwind of calculated violence. Ramming was a common tactic, designed to disable the larger, slower merchant vessel, throwing its crew into disarray. Grappling hooks would then fly, biting into the timber of the enemy ship, drawing the two vessels inexorably together. What followed was a swift and overwhelming boarding action. The objective was to subdue the crew quickly, to prevent resistance, and to seize control of the ship and its valuable cargo with minimal fuss. Intimidation and brutality were not random acts of cruelty, but calculated tools in their arsenal. The calculated use of violence, torture, and even murder was designed to quickly subdue crews and deter any thoughts of resistance. The sight of a few men swiftly dispatched, or the chilling sound of a scream, was often enough to break the will of an entire ship's company. This was not about drawn-out battles. It was about efficiency. The goal was to secure the prize, dispose of any threats, and vanish back into the maritime wilderness. The terror they instilled ensured compliance, making subsequent raids easier as word of their ruthlessness spread along the coast. But the sea wolves did not confine their depredations to the open water. Coastal villages and isolated settlements, particularly those lacking in defenses, were equally vulnerable targets. Picture a small fishing hamlet, nestled quietly along a bay, its inhabitants asleep in their simple homes. The sudden shouts, the glow of torches in the pre-dawn darkness, would signal a landing party from the sea. These were often night raids, designed to surprise inhabitants, to exploit the cover of darkness and the element of shock. The systematic looting that followed was brutal and comprehensive. Food stores, livestock, precious metals from churches or wealthier homes, and textiles, anything of value was stripped away. The purpose was not merely destruction, but acquisition, to replenish their own dwindling supplies and to acquire goods for sale. Kidnapping and ransom also became a lucrative, albeit risky, enterprise for these coastal brigands. The abduction of wealthy individuals or their family members offered a far greater potential for reward than a mere haul of goods. A captured merchant, a local noble, or even a prosperous monk could command a substantial ransom, providing the pirates with a significant windfall. These were often meticulously planned abductions, relying on local intelligence gleaned through coercion or illicit networks. And for those who resisted, or for those whose homes offered no immediate plunder, arson was a chillingly effective method. Setting fire to homes or entire villages served multiple purposes: to create diversion during a raid, to force surrender, or simply for wanton destruction and terror, leaving behind a smoking ruin as a stark warning to others. The flickering light of distant fires on the horizon became a dreaded sight for those living near the shore. Central to their operations were their hidden harbors and coastal lairs. These were not grand fortresses, but secluded coves, twisting estuaries, and small, uninhabited islands, known only to those with an intimate knowledge of the local waters. These secret havens served as secure bases for operations, allowing for ship repairs away from prying eyes, and providing safe storage for their ill-gotten plunder. They were often chosen for their natural fortifications, locations with difficult access by land, making them harder for authorities to assault. A narrow entrance, guarded by treacherous currents or hidden reefs, could make a small inlet a virtually impregnable stronghold for a handful of determined men. To sustain themselves in these remote locations, pirate groups relied on illicit supply networks. These often involved coercion of local villages, forcing them to provide food, water, or even intelligence under threat of violence. Corrupt officials in nearby port towns might also turn a blind eye, or actively participate, in exchange for a share of the profits, facilitating the flow of necessities and the disposal of stolen goods. This clandestine economy was vital to their continued existence, linking the lawless sea to the more regulated world of the land. Their ships, as mentioned, were typically small, fast vessels, designed for the specific demands of coastal raiding. They blended the efficiency of oar power for speed and maneuverability in shallow coastal waters with sails for longer journeys across open seas. This combination allowed them to navigate intricate shorelines, quickly close in on targets, and make rapid escapes from pursuing authorities. Their weaponry was practical and brutal, focused on the close-quarters combat of boarding actions, bows and crossbows for initial volleys, javelins, and a terrifying array of hand-to-hand combat weapons like swords, axes, and knives. These were not weapons of honor, but of sudden, decisive violence. A profound knowledge of the sea was perhaps their most crucial asset. Deep familiarity with local currents, the unpredictable ebb and flow of tides, the locations of hidden reefs, and the subtle nuances of coastal landmarks was essential for effective operations and successful evasion. They understood the language of the waves, the subtle shifts in wind, and the ways in which fog could be both a friend and a foe. This intimate geographical knowledge allowed them to strike with precision and disappear without a trace, leaving behind only the cold dread of their passage. Brutal enforcement and intimidation were not just tactics, but a core philosophy. The swift and often excessive use of violence was paramount, designed to ensure compliance from victims, instill pervasive fear, and decisively deter any pursuit. There was no mercy for resistance. Anyone who fought back or appeared to be a threat was quickly and brutally eliminated. Stories, often chillingly true, circulated among coastal communities of captured crews being tortured, mutilated, or simply thrown overboard to eliminate witnesses. These tales, whether witnessed firsthand or passed on through hushed whispers, solidified the terrifying reputation of the sea wolves, ensuring that future victims were more likely to surrender without a struggle. Once plunder was secured, the crucial role of fencers emerged. These were individuals in port towns or inland markets who would buy and resell stolen goods, often at a fraction of their true value. Without these illicit networks, the pirates' gains would be worthless. These fences provided the vital link between the lawless acquisition of goods and their re-entry into the legitimate economy, however tainted. Information networks were equally critical. Spies or coerced informants within coastal communities provided intelligence on ship movements, valuable cargoes, and the activities of law enforcement. A quiet word in a taverna, a clandestine meeting on a deserted beach, could provide the crucial detail that led to the next lucrative strike. This web of informants extended the pirates' reach far beyond their ships. Finally, some pirate groups even developed coastal protection rackets. They would extort payments or supplies from nearby villages in exchange for protection, often from other pirate groups, or indeed, from themselves. Villages, caught between the hammer of the pirates and the often ineffective anvil of distant authorities, frequently complied out of fear, lacking any reliable means of defense. This insidious form of control created a layer of silent complicity, turning ordinary people into unwitting enablers of their own oppression. The operational methods of these medieval sea wolves, therefore, were a stark testament to their cunning, adaptability, and unwavering brutality, a constant shadow hovering over the daily lives of those who dared to live and trade by the unforgiving medieval sea. Their existence was a chilling demonstration of how desperation, combined with opportunity and a profound understanding of their environment, could forge a formidable and terrifying force. The rhythm of their lives was one of constant predatory vigilance. The relentless activities of the medieval sea wolves cast a long, pervasive shadow across the coastal communities of Europe, reaching far beyond the immediate shock of a raid or the swift violence of a boarding action. The impact of widespread medieval piracy was profound and devastating, unraveling the very fabric of society, crippling economies, and challenging the authority of lords and kings alike. It was a constant, gnawing anxiety that seeped into the daily lives of countless individuals, shaping their decisions and their very perception of the world around them. Perhaps the most immediate and far-reaching consequence was the severe economic devastation. The lifeblood of medieval commerce flowed along the sea lanes, with merchant ships acting as vital arteries connecting distant lands and bustling markets. When these routes became unsafe due to pirate depredations, the disruption of maritime trade was catastrophic. Merchants, faced with the constant threat of losing their valuable cargoes, became increasingly hesitant to embark on voyages. This reluctance led to a sharp decrease in merchant shipping, which in turn caused prices for goods to skyrocket in affected regions, leading to widespread economic stagnation. Imagine a city reliant on imported grain, suddenly finding its supplies dwindling as ships refused to sail, or its costs becoming prohibitively expensive due to the risk. The ripple effect was immense, touching every aspect of daily life, from the cost of bread to the availability of exotic spices. Furthermore, the loss of revenue for local lords and kings was significant. Customs duties and tolls, traditionally collected from maritime trade, could not be gathered if ships simply ceased to sail, or if their goods were plundered before reaching port. This deprived rulers of vital income, weakening their ability to fund armies, maintain infrastructure, or indeed, to protect their own subjects. The very mechanisms of medieval governance suffered under this sustained economic assault. Fishing communities, the very essence of coastal life, found themselves particularly vulnerable. The constant threat to fishing fleets meant reduced catches, as fishermen dared not venture far from shore. Boats were damaged or stolen, and the pervasive fear led to poverty for entire coastal populations dependent on the sea's bounty. The quiet rhythm of their lives, once dictated by the tides and the migratory patterns of fish, was now governed by the unseen menace lurking beyond the horizon. For these communities, the sea, once their provider, had become a source of profound danger. The pervasive threat also led to significantly increased costs of security across the maritime industry. Merchants and ship owners were forced to hire armed guards, outfit their vessels defensively with stronger hulls or even basic weaponry, or in many cases, pay protection money to local strongmen or even to pirate groups themselves. These additional expenses were inevitably passed on to consumers, further increasing the cost of goods and contributing to economic hardship. Every transaction, every journey, became more expensive, simply because of the shadow of the sea wolf. Even agricultural ruin was a direct consequence of pirate activity. Raids on coastal farms led to the destruction of crops, the theft of livestock, and in many tragic instances, the abandonment of fertile land as families fled inland to seek safety. This displacement of populations caused local food shortages, further exacerbating the economic woes of a region already struggling under the weight of maritime insecurity. The land, once a stable anchor, became just as vulnerable as the sea. Beyond the economic sphere, the psychological toll was immense, creating pervasive social fear and insecurity. The constant anxiety associated with sea travel and living near the coast made maritime activities perilous, transforming what should have been routine journeys into exercises in terror. The long-term effects on communities living in perpetual fear of pirate raids were debilitating, leading to chronic stress and a profound sense of despair. Imagine generations growing up with the ingrained fear of the sea, the chilling stories of sudden appearances and brutal violence becoming part of their collective memory. This fear often led to the isolation of communities, as coastal villages and hamlets became more insular, their maritime connections severed or drastically reduced due to the overwhelming danger. The vibrant exchange of goods and ideas that characterized healthy coastal life dwindled, replaced by a cautious, fearful existence. In severely affected areas, there was a palpable breakdown of social order. Local authorities often proved ineffective against well-organized pirate gangs, leading to a decline in law and order that allowed other forms of criminality to flourish. When the protectors could not protect, the very concept of governance began to fray. This ineffectiveness led directly to the weakening of authority, eroding the legitimacy of feudal lords and royal governments. Their inability to protect their subjects and vital trade routes from pirates undermined their power and the trust placed in them. The very concept of the king's peace, the idea that a monarch's authority guaranteed safety and order, was profoundly challenged and undermined when coastal waters were effectively controlled by pirates. Lords were forced to expend significant resources on hunting down pirates, building coastal defenses, and diverting funds from other initiatives, further straining their already limited treasuries. This constant drain of resources, both financial and military, diverted attention and energy away from other pressing matters of governance and development. The demographic impact was also notable. The pervasive fear led to population displacement, with people abandoning dangerous coastal areas to seek safety inland or in more heavily fortified towns. While this contributed to urban growth in some areas, it also created deserted lands and left once thriving coastal regions desolate. Beyond displacement, there were direct casualties, deaths from pirate attacks, skirmishes with pursuers, and the inherent hardships of a life lived outside the law. These were not abstract numbers, but individual lives brutally cut short, leaving behind grieving families and fractured communities. In response to this persistent threat, various authorities attempted to implement measures to combat piracy. Kings and powerful lords periodically organized royal proclamations and naval patrols, sending out naval expeditions to clear out pirate strongholds. However, these efforts were often sporadic and lacked the sustained presence needed to truly suppress the problem. The sheer scale of the medieval coastline and the limited resources of nascent navies meant that pirates could often simply relocate and resume their activities elsewhere. The building of coastal fortifications became a common defensive measure. More castles, watchtowers, and walled port towns were constructed to offer protection, their stone walls a stark testament to the ever-present threat. These structures provided crucial refuge, allowing communities a place to retreat to when the alarm was raised. But they could not protect trade routes or fishing fleets on the open sea. There were also attempts to enhance maritime justice, strengthening specialized admiralty courts and local maritime law enforcement to prosecute pirates more effectively. The severity of punishment for captured pirates was often extreme, with public executions, hanging, often at the low water mark so the tide would cover and uncover the body, used as a stark deterrent. Their bodies left on display as a gruesome warning to others. Coastal trade and even religious pilgrimage by sea became profoundly dangerous. Pilgrimages, once relatively common for those seeking spiritual solace or fulfilling vows, became extremely hazardous due to the threat of robbery and murder. Isolated coastal monastic communities were frequently targets for raids and extortion, sometimes forced to pay protection money to avoid plunder and destruction. The very sanctity of holy places offered no guaranteed protection against these ruthless raiders. Yet, from this crucible of fear, a counter-narrative slowly began to emerge: the rise of good Lord narratives. The popular longing for powerful figures who could bring order and justice to the lawless seas became a driving force, creating an appeal for justice that would eventually set the stage for future naval heroes. The grim reality of the sea wolves, therefore, inadvertently contributed to the eventual strengthening of central authority and the development of more sophisticated maritime security, a slow, often painful, evolution born from necessity. The shadow on the shore, though dark and menacing, eventually spurred the first glimmerings of organized resistance and the long journey towards a safer sea. The era of widespread medieval coastal piracy, a relentless and debilitating shadow that had stretched for centuries, casting its oppressive gloom over the intricate network of European coastlines and the vital arteries of maritime trade, was not, as perhaps it might have seemed to those living under its sway, destined to endure indefinitely. Like the ceaseless, slow grind of the geological forces that sculpt the very land upon which human lives are built, or the relentless, gradual shifts in the currents that govern the vastness of the ocean itself, the underlying dynamics of power and technology began, almost imperceptibly at first, to alter the landscape of the sea. These subtle, yet profound, shifts slowly but inexorably initiated a countercurrent, a rising tide of resistance and order that gradually, but with an ultimately undeniable force, began to push back the encroaching darkness of the sea wolves. The decline of this particular, localized, and often desperate brand of maritime brigandage was not heralded by a sudden, cataclysmic event, no single decisive battle that purged the seas of its menace, but rather unfolded as a protracted, gradual process, an intricate tapestry woven from a complex interplay of evolving political structures, transformative technological innovations, and the gradual, yet firm, establishment of more coherent legal frameworks. These disparate yet interconnected developments, working in concert over generations, systematically eroded the very conditions that had, for so long, allowed piracy to flourish in the fertile chaos of the medieval maritime world. Perhaps the most singular and, in hindsight, monumentally significant factor in the long-term, slow but inexorable suppression of coastal piracy was the nascent, yet increasingly robust, rise of stronger, more centralized state authorities across the fragmented political tapestry of Europe. The heart of the medieval period, particularly its earlier phases and indeed much of its high period, was characterized by a profound and pervasive fragmentation of political authority. Power, far from being consolidated in the hands of a single sovereign, was often diffused and scattered, distributed among a myriad of competing feudal lords, fiercely independent city-states, powerful merchant republics, and a patchwork of regional powers, each often vying for dominance and asserting limited, localized control. This inherently decentralized form of governance, while perhaps fostering local autonomy in some respects, inadvertently created immense and systemic vulnerabilities in the realm of coastal defense. A local feudal lord, however well-intentioned or even militarily capable, typically possessed sufficient resources only to protect his immediate stretch of coastline, perhaps the mouth of a crucial river, or the approaches to his primary port. His writ, however, rarely extended far beyond the visible horizon into the expansive, often featureless, open sea. Moreover, critically, he almost never possessed the necessary naval infrastructure or the overarching legal authority to pursue pirates across the fluid and often poorly defined jurisdictional boundaries that crisscrossed the medieval maritime world. The very concept of a unified national waters was nascent, if it existed at all. However, as the late medieval period gave way to the burgeoning early modern era, a profound transformation began to sweep across the continent. Powerful monarchies, driven by a combination of ambition, economic necessity, and the increasing sophistication of their administrative apparatus, began a relentless process of consolidating their power. This meant not only extending their political and military reach ever further inland, subsuming smaller lordships and asserting direct control over vast swathes of territory, but also, crucially, recognizing that their influence and, indeed, their very survival, depended increasingly on projecting their authority beyond their land-based frontiers and into the maritime sphere. Kings and nascent national governments, notably those of England, France, Castile, which would evolve into Spain, and later others, began to grasp with increasing clarity that effective control of the seas was no longer merely a peripheral concern, but rather a vital imperative. It was indispensable not only for the seamless flow of international trade, which underpinned their burgeoning treasuries and the very prosperity of their emerging nations, but also for ensuring national security, safeguarding their burgeoning colonial ambitions, and projecting their military and diplomatic power far beyond their continental shores. The sea, once a chaotic frontier, was slowly being conceptualized as an extension of the sovereign's dominion. This growing recognition of the sea's strategic importance catalyzed a truly revolutionary development: the systematic establishment of permanent, state-funded navies. Prior to this, naval forces were often assembled on an ad hoc basis, requisitioned or hired merchant ships pressed into service for specific campaigns or conflicts, only to be disbanded once the immediate need had passed. These nascent royal navies, however, represented a radical departure. They embodied a continuous, institutional commitment to maritime security. Initially, these fleets were often small, relatively rudimentary, and composed of vessels that were only marginally more sophisticated than the larger merchant ships they were meant to protect. Yet, steadily, inexorably, these forces grew in both size and operational sophistication. They developed professional cadres of officers and sailors, accumulated specialized warships, and honed their operational doctrine. Their primary mission, which gradually evolved, shifted from merely transporting troops for land campaigns or engaging in occasional, large-scale fleet battles, to actively patrolling coastal waters on a regular basis, systematically hunting down and apprehending pirate vessels, and, perhaps most importantly, providing a consistent and visible protective presence for vulnerable merchant shipping. The very presence of professional, well-equipped warships, flying the king's colors, capable of sustained operations at sea and actively enforcing the monarch's writ, dramatically and fundamentally altered the risk-reward calculus for pirate gangs. A small, fast-raiding vessel, once virtually immune to capture due to the absence of effective pursuit, now faced the very real and immediate prospect of encountering a larger, more powerful royal ship, specifically tasked with its apprehension or, if necessary, its outright destruction. The odds, which had for so long favored the predator, were slowly but surely beginning to shift decisively towards the forces of law and order. Compounding these political shifts, and indeed enabling the growth of effective naval power, were the continuous and often groundbreaking technological advancements in shipbuilding and, to a lesser extent, in navigation. The introduction of new, larger, and more robust merchant ship designs, such as the formidable carrack in the 15th century and, later, the even more impressive galleon in the 16th, significantly enhanced the resilience of commercial vessels. These ships were far less susceptible to the crude ramming tactics and swift boarding actions that had been the hallmark of medieval pirate attacks. They boasted considerably higher freeboards, the distance from the waterline to the deck, making it much more difficult for a boarding party to clamber over the sides. Furthermore, they often featured strengthened hulls and, increasingly, began to incorporate defensive armaments. As naval architecture continued its relentless march forward, warships themselves became progressively more specialized and powerfully armed. They were designed with stronger construction to withstand the recoil of heavier guns and were capable of mounting ever more powerful cannons, often arranged in broadsides. The revolutionary ability to engage and potentially sink an enemy vessel from a considerable distance with sustained cannon fire, rather than having to rely solely on the risky and often bloody close-quarters combat of boarding, fundamentally transformed naval warfare. This gave state navies a decisive and overwhelming advantage over the smaller, less robustly built, and comparatively unarmed pirate craft. Simultaneously, though perhaps less dramatically, navigational tools and techniques, while still rudimentary by modern standards, saw incremental improvements. The refinement of the compass, the development of early astrolabes for calculating latitude, and the increasing accuracy of charts allowed for more precise plotting of courses, better tracking of vessels at sea, and, crucially, the more coordinated deployment of naval patrols to intercept known pirate hotbeds or protect specific shipping lanes. The development and systematic strengthening of maritime law and its associated legal institutions further hammered at the foundations of piracy. As states matured and grew more powerful, they embarked upon the crucial task of formalizing legal codes specifically pertaining to maritime crime. The previous patchwork of local customs, feudal decrees, and ecclesiastical pronouncements was gradually replaced by more comprehensive and coherent legal frameworks. Admiralty courts, specialized legal bodies exclusively dedicated to adjudicating offenses committed at sea, became more prevalent, gaining greater authority and becoming demonstrably more effective in their operations. These courts possessed the explicit authority to prosecute individuals accused of piracy, to confiscate their ill-gotten gains and any assets associated with their criminal enterprises, and to impose consistently severe penalties, including the ultimate sanction of execution. The legal framework surrounding piracy became increasingly clear-cut and, perhaps more importantly, was applied with greater consistency across broadening territories. This systematic clarity began to dismantle the ambiguity that had once allowed individuals to deftly blur the lines between legitimate privateering, often sanctioned by letters of marque during wartime, and outright, unsanctioned brigandage. The burgeoning legal concept of hostis homini generis, literally enemy of all mankind, began to gain significant traction within international legal discourse. This powerful designation effectively branded pirates as universal criminals, individuals against whom all nations and their respective legal systems had the inherent right to act, regardless of the pirate's nationality or the flag under which they might have nominally sailed. This legal clarity, the explicit and universal condemnation of piracy, removed any lingering pretense of legitimacy or moral ambiguity for those engaging in unauthorized raiding, making it unequivocally a capital offense in the eyes of most established powers. The rule of law, however imperfectly, was beginning to extend its tendrils onto the vast, previously anarchic, canvas of the open ocean. Even a nascent form of international cooperation, though never truly seamless or perfectly cohesive, began to emerge and saw sporadic, yet meaningful, improvements over time. as maritime trade became an increasingly vital and indispensable component of the economic prosperity of multiple, interconnected nations. The shared and omnipresent threat of piracy occasionally spurred states, even those often at odds on other fronts, to engage in collaborative anti-piracy efforts. While grand, unified naval alliances were rare, smaller, localized treaties were sometimes signed between neighboring powers or trading partners, outlining mutual assistance and suppressing piracy within agreed-upon zones. Joint naval operations, though still exceptional rather than routine, would occasionally demonstrate a collective political will to suppress the menace. A prime example of this was the powerful Hanseatic League, a formidable confederation of powerful merchant guilds and thriving market towns primarily in Northern Europe. This league frequently organized its own substantial fleets and military forces, not for conquest, but specifically to protect its immensely lucrative trade routes from the depredations of pirates, such as the infamous Vitalian Bruder. This proactive form of self-defense, undertaken by powerful merchant associations, often served as a crucial precursor to, and indeed a complement for, later state-led naval efforts. It demonstrated that collective economic interests could be a powerful catalyst for effective and coordinated anti-piracy measures, highlighting the shared understanding of the economic imperative to secure the seas. Moreover, the shifting contours of the economic landscape itself gradually contributed to making the precarious and perpetually dangerous life of a pirate significantly less appealing for an increasing number of individuals. As legitimate trade routes became demonstrably safer due to improved naval patrols and more reliable, regulated commerce, and as burgeoning urban centers across Europe grew in size and sophistication, offering a wider array of more diversified and legitimate employment opportunities, the desperate circumstances that had often served as the primary push factor, driving individuals into the desperate embrace of piracy, began to subtly, but steadily, alleviate. While poverty and social disenfranchisement never completely vanished, and indeed continue to plague societies, the stark, binary choice between abject starvation and outright piracy became less absolute for certain segments of the population. The ever-increasing risks associated with a life of piracy, particularly with the advent of improved and more effective naval patrols and the consistent application of harsher legal penalties, began to significantly outweigh the potential, and increasingly fleeting, rewards for a growing number of people. The ledger of risk versus reward began to tip decisively in favor of legitimate, albeit often hard, labor. However, it is absolutely crucial to understand that the decline of medieval coastal piracy, while a profound historical shift, did not equate to its complete and utter eradication. Piracy, in its multifarious forms, has proven to be an astonishingly resilient and adaptable phenomenon, persisting throughout the long sweep of human history and, indeed, continuing to plague certain regions of our modern world to this very day. The sea wolves of the medieval period, rather than disappearing entirely, simply adapted, demonstrating a remarkable capacity for evolutionary change in their methods and their hunting grounds. As centralized states gained ever tighter control over their immediate coastal waters, rigorously policing their sovereign maritime zones, many pirate groups were either decisively suppressed or more commonly, forced to relocate to more remote, less governed regions of the world. Others scaled up their operations, transforming into something far grander and more organized, evolving into the romanticized, yet often brutal, Golden Age buccaneers and privateers of the burgeoning colonial era, operating with the implicit or explicit sanction of various European powers during periods of intense geopolitical rivalry. Still others transitioned into entirely new forms of maritime crime, becoming adept smugglers, navigating the ever-changing tides of illicit trade. Indeed, participating in larger, state-sponsored privateering ventures during periods of international conflict, blurring the lines between legitimate warfare and legalized plunder. The core characteristics that define the medieval sea wolf: opportunistic violence, the shrewd exploitation of weak governance, a pervasive reliance on instilling fear, and the engagement in complex illicit economies, did not vanish from the maritime landscape. Instead, they merely transmuted, taking on new guises and finding new arenas for their predatory activities. The end of the medieval era of coastal piracy, therefore, marks not a definitive conclusion to maritime crime, but rather a profound transformation in its nature and scope. It signifies the steadily growing capability of emerging nation-states to project their authority and power onto the high seas, the gradual, often arduous, triumph of order over localized chaos within increasingly defined maritime zones, and the relentless, ongoing evolution of both criminal methodologies and the sophisticated countermeasures designed to combat them. The small, often desperate, localized bands of coastal brigands, operating from their secret, hidden coves and preying on vulnerable villages and isolated merchant vessels, gradually gave way to more organized, often larger scale, and sometimes state-sanctioned forms of maritime predation, or was simply pushed to the furthest fringes of global commerce and exploration. The seas, however, in their boundless and unpredictable immensity, never became entirely safe. The inherent, timeless challenges of effectively policing vast, fluid oceans and the enduring, deeply rooted human propensity for greed, violence, and exploitation ensured that the fundamental spirit of the sea wolf would continue to manifest in new and unsettling ways across the maritime landscape. Their story, therefore, is a testament to the slow, often painful, and always ongoing progress of civilization's reach over the unruly elements and the persistent, complex challenges of establishing and maintaining peace and order on the world's waters. It is a critical chapter that vividly highlights the dynamic, ever-present struggle between the forces of law and lawlessness, a struggle that continues, in various forms, to shape our modern world and challenge our collective resolve. The shadow, though diminished in one form, merely shifted its shape, a testament to the enduring human story on the boundless ocean. As the final vestiges of medieval coastal piracy faded into the annals of history, replaced by more organized state power and evolving maritime realities, the spirit and core characteristics of the sea wolf did not vanish entirely. Instead, they adapted, transmuted, and continued to manifest in new forms of maritime threats that plague our modern world. The underlying human propensity for violence, greed, and the formation of predatory groups remains a constant throughout history, proving that while the ships and weapons may change, the fundamental motivations for preying upon others at sea endure. Consider, for a moment, the chilling parallels between the medieval sea wolves and the modern scourge of Somali piracy. While the technology is vastly different, speedboats armed with GPS and satellite phones replacing small, oar-powered galleys, the modus operandi bears a striking resemblance. Like their medieval predecessors, Somali pirates often emerge from conditions of extreme desperation, driven by poverty, political instability, and the collapse of traditional livelihoods, such as fishing fleets decimated by illegal trawling from foreign vessels. They, too, targeted vulnerable merchant ships, often those with low freeboards or insufficient security, in highly congested shipping lanes. The overwhelming use of force, the intimidation tactics to quickly subdue crews, and the focus on seizing valuable assets, in this case, ships and their crews for ransom, are direct echoes of medieval raiding methods. The reliance on remote, ungoverned coastlines for safe havens, the establishment of illicit networks for ransom negotiation, and the significant economic disruption caused to global trade routes are all stark reminders that the fundamental blueprint of maritime predation persists. The fear instilled in modern seafarers, the rerouting of ships, and the increased costs of security, including armed guards and naval escorts, are direct consequences that mirror the medieval experience, simply on a global scale with more advanced logistics. Beyond traditional piracy, the core characteristics of opportunistic violence and illicit economies find new expressions in contemporary maritime crime. The vast, ungoverned expanses of the ocean continue to offer a shadowy arena for various illegal activities. Drug smuggling, for instance, thrives on the same principles of concealment and evasion that medieval pirates exploited. Fast, low-profile vessels, or even repurposed fishing boats, carry vast quantities of narcotics across international waters, leveraging remote coastlines and intricate networks of complicit individuals to avoid detection. The violence associated with drug cartels often extends to the sea, where rival groups clash or enforcement agencies are met with armed resistance, echoing the brutal efficiency of the sea wolves in protecting their illicit gains. The economic incentive, the vast profits to be made, remains a powerful driver, pushing individuals and organizations to operate outside the law, just as the promise of plunder fueled medieval brigands. Human trafficking by sea is another horrific manifestation of this enduring predatory nature. Desperate individuals, often fleeing conflict or poverty, become vulnerable prey for criminal networks who promise safe passage but deliver exploitation, abuse, and often death. These traffickers, like the sea wolves of old, exploit the vastness of the sea, its lack of immediate governance, and the desperation of their victims. The goods they transport are human beings, and the violence they employ is often psychological as much as physical, ensuring compliance through fear and the crushing weight of their victims' desperate circumstances. The illicit economy in this context is a trade in human lives, a chilling continuation of the ancient practice of preying on the vulnerable for profit, utilizing the anonymity of the open ocean as their cover. Furthermore, illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, while not involving direct violence against humans, embodies the scavenger aspect of the medieval pirates. These operations strip marine resources without regard for law or sustainability, exploiting weak governance in international waters or the territorial waters of developing nations. The vessels involved often operate without proper licenses, engage in deceptive practices, and plunder resources that rightfully belong to coastal communities, contributing to their economic hardship and fostering a sense of injustice. The direct impact on the livelihoods of legitimate fishermen, the depletion of fish stocks, and the challenges for enforcement agencies in monitoring vast oceanic areas all resonate with the historical context of unchecked maritime predation. The underlying dark side of human nature remains a constant throughout this historical arc. The human propensity for violence, greed, and the formation of predatory groups is not a medieval anomaly but an enduring facet of our collective existence. Whether it's the desperate fisherman turning to piracy in the 14th century, the armed smuggler evading customs in the 18th, or the sophisticated criminal syndicate trafficking drugs or people in the 21st, the motivations are deeply rooted. The allure of quick profit, the willingness to exploit the vulnerable, and the formation of hierarchical groups to execute these illicit activities are patterns that transcend specific historical periods and technological advancements. The sea, with its inherent vastness and the challenges it poses to effective governance, continues to provide a fertile ground for these predatory instincts to manifest. Finally, the legacy of the sea wolves, both the known and lesser known, has indelibly shaped our literature and folklore. The pirate archetype, far from fading into obscurity, has become a recurring and captivating figure in ballads, stories, and later, in novels, films, and video games. This archetype often blends a mix of primal fear and grudging fascination. While the medieval coastal brigands might not have been the swashbuckling romantics of later eras, their very existence contributed to the mystique and terror of the sea outlaw. The image of the dark sail on the horizon, the sudden raid, the stolen treasure, these foundational elements were born from the grim realities of medieval predation. The sea itself, in our collective consciousness, continues to be associated with danger, mystery, and hidden threats. Folk tales speak of phantom ships, lost treasures, and malevolent forces lurking beneath the waves. While these are often supernatural embellishments, their roots lie in the very real, very human dangers that once stalked the seas. The vast, untamed ocean, capable of both immense beauty and terrifying destruction, remains a powerful symbol of the unknown, a place where order can easily dissolve and primal forces, both natural and human, can hold sway. The fear instilled by the medieval sea wolves contributed to this enduring perception, solidifying the idea that beneath the surface of the calmest waters, unseen dangers can always lie in wait. In conclusion, the sea wolves and scavengers of medieval coasts represent a brutal yet revealing chapter in maritime history. Born from desperation, conflict, and the vast, untamed ocean, these lesser-known pirates were far from the swashbuckling heroes of fiction. They brought economic ruin, instilled pervasive fear in coastal communities, and challenged the very foundations of medieval governance and trade. While the era of widespread medieval piracy eventually faded with the rise of stronger states and more effective naval power, their story serves as a stark reminder of the harsh realities of life outside the law and the enduring human struggle against maritime violence, chaos, and the predatory nature of organized crime throughout history. The echoes of their methods, their motivations, and the fear they instilled continue to resonate in the modern world, a quiet, unsettling current beneath the surface of global commerce and daily life. The seas, ancient and unforgiving, continue to whisper tales of predation, a timeless saga of shadows on the shore.